Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another random review. Something a little bit different today, because I'm going to do a random review of a television programme. Can you believe they still make television programmes? This is from 2015 and it was on the BBC apparently. And this is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Norrell, based on a book by Susanna Clarke. Starring the wonderful Eddie Marsan, that's why I picked it up, along with Mark Warren and Paul Kay. And it's about magic. Now obviously with Harry Potter, just about every book about magic has since been adapted and made into a film or a television programme. I don't really watch that much terrestrial television, and I certainly don't watch that much BBC. So I had never heard of it. It was 2015, as I say, which is a whole 8 years ago. It's just 7 episodes, just a little bit under 7 hours, but I actually rather enjoyed it. It's about magic, as I say, but it's a little bit darker than obviously Harry Potter. It's influenced a little bit by Labyrinth, I would say. Eddie Marsan, it's set in 1806. Magic in England hasn't really been practiced for about 300 years. We're introduced to this young man who goes to the York Magic Society, which is basically people who study magic but nobody actually performs magic anymore. As somebody, as the kind of head of the club suggests, a botanist wouldn't invent new flowers, or an astronomer wouldn't invent a new star, so why should magicians actually practice magic and perform spells? But this young man wants to actually ask why magic isn't used anymore. And we have this character, Mr. Norrell, played by Eddie Marsan, who is one of the most underappreciated British actors, British character actors. I think he's fantastic. I mean, he was in Miami Vice, for goodness sake, Michael Mann. He's just so good. I did a random review a few years ago of Still Life, which is a film that I absolutely adore and made me weep like a small child. If you hadn't checked that out, I would highly recommend that. Unfortunately not on Blu-ray, it's on Artificial Eye DVD. I think there is actually a Blu-ray of this. This is just the DVD, 2-disc DVD set, which cost me about £2 or £3 whole pounds. But anyway, Eddie Marsan's character, Mr. Norrell, is then investigated by the York Magicians Club, and he performs some magic on them in York Minster Abbey. And he and his assistant, ex-pickpocket, go down to London to try and help in the Napoleonic Wars, but the politicians poo-poo him. And he is a man of learning and a man of books. You could argue he doesn't really have natural flair. He has this desire to kind of be renowned and famous, but he's also kind of terrified and doesn't want to show off. And again, it's that kind of conflicted character that Eddie Marsan plays really well. And we also have this character of Jonathan Strange, who is a bit of a layabout, doesn't have a job or a career, and his wife suggests he gets one, and he decides to take up magic. Mr. Norrell is introduced around London by a character who I can't remember the actor's name, but he was in the thick of it as a spin doctor, and here he plays essentially an 1806 version of a spin doctor, and he plays Weasley characters quite well. And the politician who ends up using Mr. Norrell as his wife is sick, and then dies, and Norrell suggests he could perhaps bring her back from the dead. But of course he has to use the help of somebody from the other side, and this is where the Labyrinth connection comes in, because it is Fairy King, played by Mark Warren. Now I do think Christopher Walken could have played this, a younger Christopher Walken could have played this, because he has really big hair and big bushy eyebrows, not a big bushy black moustache, but Christopher Walken could have pulled this off. As the Fairy King owes Mr. Norrell a favour, which we'd never find out what the favour is, which is actually quite good. So in exchange for bringing the woman back to life, he takes part of her, and he wants half of her remaining life. And Norrell agrees, because again he wants to look good himself. But he thinks she'll just die early, but obviously later than she has actually died. But the Fairy King has kind of tricked him, because he'll take her at night, essentially sending her mad, because she comes back when she wakes up, she's completely delirious and talking of this other place where she's dancing all night, because that's what Fairy Kings do. So as far as Labyrinth is concerned, it could be David Bowie. David Bowie could be playing the Fairy King quite easily. Into this, we also have Paul Kaye's character, who is kind of the Cassandra character of the piece. He's telling everybody that he knows what's going to happen and the futures and destinies of all these characters. And then through various machinations, Jonathan Strange becomes Norrell's pupil, and he's much more flamboyant, he has much more natural talent than Norrell. He doesn't necessarily have to read the books, he just is more intuitive to magic, but Norrell wants only a certain kind of magic to be known, not the other part of the magic, whereas Strange wants to bring back all the magic, but there are obviously consequences for that. And we also have a slave servant of African descent who works for the politician in the family, and he comes under the spell of the Fairy King as well, and he is promised that one day he will become a king. So you have lots of kind of storylines. You have the conservative Mr. Norrell as far as the magic, and the kind of more flamboyant, let's open all the doors to everything, all kinds of magic, Jonathan Strange kind of his viewpoint. At several points Strange is sent over to Europe to help the Duke of Wellington, so there's some nice battle scenes as well, as he builds a road for the army, and various other uses of magic. There's no wands and pointy hats and stuff like that, even though there is some jokes about pointy hats. It's funny, but it's not necessarily a comedy. It's kind of funny in the delivery of some lines, especially by Marson. who of course is very versatile. It is quite dark, there's violence, there's bloody images, and according to the 15 rating, strong supernatural threat. Again, I can't even imagine when this would... I'm guessing it must have been shown after 9 on the BBC, but again, I don't ever remember it being on. But then again, as I say, I don't really scroll through the BBC programming. But I enjoyed it a lot. Again, there's just 7 episodes. It does perhaps leave itself open to a continuation of the story, but considering it was 8 years ago, I don't know whether Susanna Clarke is still living or whether she did write any more books featuring those two characters, but obviously nothing has appeared 8 years later, which in some ways is good. So perhaps it was a blink and you'll miss it, but I think it's actually worth a little look. The CG scenes aren't the best. I mean, obviously the BBC, perhaps the budget wasn't that big, so the CG effects aren't the greatest in the world, but the production design, it was shot in Yorkshire and also Croatia, obviously to look like Europe. The stuff in Venice, there's obviously the war stuff over in Europe. The decor is really quite interesting. It's very green. There is the whole subtext of nature, and again that, you know, how much knowledge do you want, and knowledge is dangerous, especially if you don't understand it, and obviously power is dangerous if you don't understand or don't know how to control it. You know, Jonathan Strange is very much, he can perform the magic, but he doesn't understand how he does it, because again it's much more natural to him, whereas Norrell knows the nuts and bolts of the magic because he studied all these books. He has a huge library, which again leads to some humour. There's also the prophecy, as Paul Kaye's character, about the Raven King, so there's the mystery of who is the Raven King, because again 300 years ago, when magic was kind of taken out of England, the Raven King took all the magic and left and went somewhere else, perhaps to this other side where the Fairy King exists. So there's a nice thread of going through the film expecting the Raven King to turn up and who's going to be the Raven King, etc. It's just really enjoyable. Again, there's some perhaps hiccups along the way, but the BBC do like their costume drama. And again, for me, the reason I picked up was Eddie Marsan. And he is fantastic in it. Everybody's really good in it, to be honest. Even although I would have preferred Christopher Walken as the Fairy King, or David Bowie, perhaps. The Goblin King becomes the Fairy King. I don't know. So thanks very much for watching this TV version of a random review of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Please let me know if you ever watched it and what you think of it, and hopefully you'll join me again for more random reviews. This is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, saying farewell.